sretna pod suncem, rasti u jaslama dječjim, rasti i cvijetaj zemljo radnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem dika. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem dika. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem dika. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode,
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to what I'm going to call a special broadcast because it's a dramatic change of plan from what I was going to do. So we're going to do the next episode of our Stalin series today. But when I saw that Biden had made this speech, initially I wasn't too interested in it, but then I saw that the content was causing Israelis to go crazy, so I looked at it and watched the speech, and it turns out that this is essentially the US imperialists looking for a way out of the blood-soaked mess that they are in West Asia. Now, if you're not familiar with what has gone on, Biden, I'm just going to drop the Al Jazeera summary into the chat so you can see it. Biden made a speech where he started off doing some horrifically smug shit about Trump getting convicted, which next to what the other things that he said looks, like the stupid petty nonsense that it is. I think he was front loading with that basically to give his supporters a lift, because what he had to say afterwards was an admission of a gargantuan failure on his part and his administration's part. What he has said is that essentially a deal has been put together to bring an immediate ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. and this will come in 3 phases. For first, an immediate ceasefire and an exchange of prisoners, with the civilians, particularly the old and the sick, being released first by both the Palestinian National Liberation Forces, though Biden just calls them Hamas, and an exchange also coming from the Israelis. Then there'll be what Biden said will be 600 trucks a day today, man, with the idea that there will be then unlimited humanitarian aid going into Gaza. And then Biden said there would be reconstruction of Gaza, and it would be reconstructed and not turned over to Israel, and that the Palestinians could return to their rebuilt homes. Now, of course, one should never trust the words exactly of a representative or the chief representative of US imperialism, but it's clear to me that the plan he has worked out, and it seems that the Saudi compradors were, of course, heavily involved in this, being very concerned about the pressure it was bringing on them. The plan is clearly to try and turn Gaza over to the administration of maybe the Abbas so-called government, and essentially stick a comprador regime in Gaza, try and evict Hamas and the other representatives of the National Liberation Forces, such as the PFLP, the DFLP, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others, and basically say that's a win for Israel. Biden was trying, or whoever wrote Biden's words for him, is trying to spin this as a win for Israel, saying Hamas can no longer carry out an attack like October the 7th, basically trying to sell this as some kind of heroic victory for the Israeli regime. And then he addressed, Biden does, the Israelis directly. He appeared to be talking to them directly when he said that there will be those in Israel who want to carry on this war indefinitely, and he said that this was not something that was advisable. He said openly that there was no path to victory, that the war, if the Israelis tried to continue the war in Gaza, it would go on indefinitely and they would never win, and it would, and this is Biden's direct words, he said, would lead to the further international isolation of Israel. So that's quite an admission from Biden, and he has essentially admitted that the Israeli economy is tanking. He admitted that the Israeli regime is now internationally isolated, and admitted that they can't win militarily. So he has come out and said this. Apparently, represents some kind of deal being reached between negotiators from principally Hamas, though I'm not sure if the other Palestinian groups have been involved in this, and somebody, maybe the chief of the Mossad organization representing Israel. Certainly, whether Netanyahu himself has signed on for this is hard to tell. He's a slippery bastard at the best of times, but it would seem that the US has essentially called time on this now. Now, yes, it's true. Almir says in the comments that Biden didn't mention a regime change in Gaza. It's essentially the same as the plan from Hamas before the Rafah invasion. It is, but he doesn't mention regime change. But to make this clear, I think that's what he's in the background of his thinking. His idea, or not his idea, so the idea in the US imperialists will be that if they can get their people on the ground into Gaza, that they can somehow uproot Hamas by dint of the fact that they have a presence there. And if they're seen to be doing the reconstruction, and if they're seen to be bringing good things for the people of Gaza, that somehow this will erode the legitimacy of Hamas. That will be their idea. They can't say that openly because, well, they've lost this round. What they have lost in a war, they will now try and regain at the negotiating table and via the reconstruction process. The aim will still be to try and push out Hamas from Gaza. and to turn it over to a comprador regime. They haven't said, but Almir's right. He hasn't said that openly, but I think that would still be their ambition. I don't think that will be possible, though. They want to push Hamas out, and we should always say the other groups involved in the national liberation movement, but I don't think that will be possible. The important thing is that this, coming on the heels of the atrocities committed by the Israeli regime in Rafah, the mass murder of at least, between 40 to 50 civilians following the Israeli dropping high explosive devices on tents, and all the other horrific things that you see every day. I mean, you open up Twitter or Telegram or Instagram, and you're confronted with the sight of a 7-month-old baby that has starved to death. That's not an image that's going to leave my imagination anytime soon. It's like it's worse than the worst horror you could imagine what the Israelis have done. And then we said this on this channel at the very beginning of this. This is how this level of horror and terror is how imperialists always fight their wars when they are confronted with a unified movement of the masses in the colonized nation. This is how they fight. They fight by inflicting unbelievable levels of pain and suffering and horror on the population that has dared to defy them. Again, let's mention the famous examples again. The French in Algeria, killing 40-odd thousand people inside a couple of weeks in 1945, before World War II had even ended. The hideous crimes of the British in Kenya, piling people into concentration camps. The hideous crimes of the Belgians for many years in what's now the DRC. We could go further and further with this, but again, the crimes of the French in Vietnam, the crimes of the US when they were trying to squash the liberation movement of the Korean people, the same US doing the same thing in Vietnam and losing on both occasions. So this is how they always fight. When the strength of a liberation movement, be it the liberation movement, Front Liberation Nationale in Algeria, the National Liberation Front, or the Viet Minh in Vietnam, the Communists or the Workers' Party of Korea in what's now the DPRK, when their strength is in the relationship with the masses and the mobilization of the masses in support of their liberation, when that is achieved, as Mao and Stalin and Lenin all observed and accurately analyzed and practiced, when that is achieved, there is no force that the unity of the masses cannot overcome. That's, of course, the biggest part of the Soviet victory in World War II against, again, a colonial army, an invading army that sought to colonize the USSR and enslave the population. And again, look at the hideous crimes of the Nazis on the Eastern Front. The reason why they are echoed today in the crimes of the Zionist regime is because this is a very similar type of operation. The Nazis, their invasion of the USSR and their attempt to subjugate it and enslave its population, that was a colonial operation. And so, because the peoples of the USSR resisted so fiercely and so heroically, the more they did so, the more the Nazis went on horrific killing sprees. And that's the reality of what's known as the Holocaust by bullet in the East. It's not just the wild madness of Nazi theories of racial supremacy, although that's a big part of it. The biggest factor in the mass slaughter engaged in by the Einsatzgruppen, by the SS and the regular German army was engaged in because they were losing. They were getting battered by the Belarusians and the majority of Ukrainians who joined resistance forces or joined the Red Army. And the only response that they had to this resistance was to slaughter civilians en masse. And again, the French did the same thing before the war in 1945 had even ended. The British then went and did the same thing in Kenya. The Dutch were doing the same thing in Indonesia, and they all lost. So this agreement being what largely what Hamas had already agreed to, and the Israelis had refused and gone on another kill crazy rampage in Rafah. The fact that Biden has had to come out and basically say to the Israelis, this is over now. Don't worry, we're going to tell everybody you won. Don't worry, you're secure. But there's no doubt in my mind at all that this is a horrific loss for the Israeli regime. For all the bloodletting that they've engaged in, for all the absolutely almost unimaginable, I'd say it was unimaginable horror, but I don't need to imagine it. It's right there in front of me. If I just open up the phone and look at some of the resistance channels, you can see what they've done. And even with all of that, the Israelis lost. And when I say lost, I don't just mean a political defeat. It's a military defeat. And it's a military defeat because when you actually dig into the realities of how the fighting went on the ground, you can see that they have suffered defeat after defeat and humiliation after humiliation on the ground. Every time they have they have attempted to engage the Palestinian forces with in a fight on the ground, they've lost and lost badly. So this is a humiliation. Their defeat is bad and is only going to get worse. And so clearly a section of the US ruling class, which is of course who Biden works for, have decided that due to the fact that not only is it the case that Israel's losing, but that loss is only going to get worse, they have decided that they are already engaged in a war that is going very badly in Ukraine. There's some of them want to now dive into some staging a provocation in or in and or around Taiwan. They have failed to go after Iran, even if the stories regarding the potential assassination of the late Iranian President Raisi were true. They've failed to contain the resistance in Gaza. The resistance in terms of the region, in terms of Lebanon, in terms of Yemen, is only getting stronger. Like the Yemenis have delivered an absolutely humiliating defeat to the US imperialists and the British in the Red Sea. They've, for all the barbarities that the US and the British have delivered to the Yemenis, not just in the last few months, but over the last decade, they've failed to break them completely. And not only that, the Yemenis are improving their military capabilities. They haven't been affected by the Operation Prosperity Guardian. I don't know what it is about American imperialists. Even the names they come up with for the operations sound like something out of a bad film. It's like Prosperity Guardian sounds like a sort of particularly low-budget Steven Seagal film. But this is why the U.S. imperialists have decided that it's time to end this. Now, of course, Netanyahu's office immediately came out and says the war will continue. We will not give up. But this is a big risk for Netanyahu if he's going to try and go down this route of hanging on until Trump gets in. You'd be a very foolish man if you took the gamble on A, Donald Trump winning, and even though he's ahead in the polls right now, and B, Donald Trump actually honoring his promises to you, because he's not done that for many people. So the US is being beaten, and not only that, they are being beaten and disgraced. Their reputation was already pretty low, but the longer this goes on and the longer they are seen to be aiding and abetting, which they are aiding, abetting, and directing a genocide, the more they lose ground everywhere else in the world. The more that anybody who might have any doubts about them or any reservations about doing deals with the Chinese or the Russians, all those doubts drain away when you look at all that the US imperialists actually offer is slaughter and death. Then it's going to make even the most rabid supporters of US imperialism start to look at, and think, is being with these guys a good idea? Is this really the way we want to go? And then they look over at the Zelensky regime in Kiev with who's looking decidedly the worse for wear these days, and start to think, well, do I really want to end up like him? And you look at elsewhere in the world, look at their puppet Pashinyan in increasing amounts of trouble in Armenia. Their attempts to color revolution the government in Georgia isn't going well. So they're in trouble everywhere. And so the more sensible of them have decided to try and bring this thing to a close, promising all kinds of things to Israel, of course, promising normalization with the Saudis, promising that don't worry, you'll be part of a regional security framework against Iran, that kind of thing. But and of course, some in the U.S. administration are looking at this with a view to calming things down, for maybe trying to reassert themselves elsewhere. Others have more clearly understood the situation, that they need to focus on one disaster at a time. Be in no doubt, though, that this, even if the Israeli regime carries on this way, and it will be only going in the direction of total collapse, as Hassan Nasrallah and other resistance leaders in the region have said. And what is absolutely clear is that the National Liberation Forces in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, have looked at the situation, and they have, before launching Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October the 7th last year, they have not only, of course, carefully prepared for it militarily and politically amongst the masses in Gaza, and kept an incredibly tight operational security. They have clearly understood the nature of their enemy. And what I mean by that is, it's very important. This is an observation that Mao makes, drawing, of course, from very old Chinese wisdom on war making, going all the way back to Sun Tzu himself, is you must understand the enemy and understand yourself. And it's clear that the National Liberation Forces in Palestine understood and understand the Israeli enemy very clearly. And they understood what a dramatic raid such as that which they carried out on October the 7th would do to the balance of forces inside the Zionist entity itself. They understood quite well how somebody like Netanyahu will respond to that, and they understood what would happen in terms of the response. They wanted the Israelis to send their army into Gaza, and they wanted to engage them in a war on the ground, because they were confident, after the leaders of the National Liberation Forces in Gaza had clearly studied the Israelis up close. Many of their leaders have, of course, been in Israeli prisons. They, of course, have contact constantly with those in their comrades in the West Bank. They know and have studied the Israeli military, its doctrines. They've studied the Israeli command structure. They've studied the Israeli politicians. They've studied Israeli society for years. Apparently this operation was planned for at least 2 years before it was launched. And so they have, before launching October the 7th, the Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, they have taken the time to understand comprehensively their enemy, to make sure, and spend many years, of course, making sure that they had the support of the masses in Gaza solidly behind them. And so when they came to launch the operation, they did it with the full knowledge, or as much knowledge as they could possibly have, of how their enemy was going to respond. And they were ready for them. They knew that the political dynamic inside Israel would not permit any other response than that which followed. The Netanyahu, a bitter reactionary who has been a very successful reactionary, so up to this point, it must be said, a very successful political manipulator who had been at the top of Israeli politics for over 30 years. They understood that the balance of forces inside his very fragile coalition would be so volatile that anything else other than a full-scale ground invasion would be the end of him. And that's what he gave. That's what he gave them. And the Israeli army has lost, and they have lost very, very badly. So you can see here. I mean, my thanks to Free Palestine TV, who sent me this particular tweet of theirs. Now, according to an Israeli minister, Gadi Eisenkot, a former minister of defense between 2015 and 2019, and the man who created the Dahia doctrine, which is, of course, the doctrine which Israel has fought its wars using, which is overwhelming mass slaughter of civilians when faced with any military challenge. Recently, the Israelis sent a full division, so somewhere between 10 to 30,000 men. Let's assume, for the purposes of argument, that this is 10,000 to 15,000 men into a place called Jabalia in Gaza. And they fought there for 21 days against around about 1,000 Palestinian fighters. And they lost and had to withdraw. So let's just reiterate that point. According to, an Israeli government minister, a former minister of defense, the Israeli army sent, let's just say for the purposes of argument, 10,000 men into Jabalia to fight 1,000 men, and they lost. They had to withdraw. And that keeps happening. It keeps happening anywhere they think they've cleared out, anywhere that they think that they can try and stage some kind of long-term occupation, they get beaten, and they get thrown out, and their army quits and runs away. Just as on October the 7th, according to information provided by given by Max Blumenthal in an interview he gave last week, I believe, on the Judge Napolitano show. On October the 7th itself, many Israeli army, full-time Israeli soldiers or Israeli military men, when they saw the Palestinian fighters coming, quit and ran away. Like, some tried to fight and lost and died. Others just simply quit and ran for it. Because again, this is an army that is, armies are a reflection of the societies and the systems which breed them. And this society, the Zionist state, has been decaying and rotting away for years. Very divided internally. Its culture is completely rotten. Its system of government is completely corrupt. Its leadership is, again, completely corrupt, and everybody knows it, by the way. Its political system is log-jammed because even the Zionist settlers hate most of the politicians. And it is reaching the end of its shelf life in terms of the fact that it's linked to US imperialism, and US imperialism is withering now, visibly so. And so its settler colony is withering along with it. And again, the Palestinian leadership in Gaza understood all of this very well, and they understood that such an army could be beaten if it could be drawn into a fight, and they have drawn it into a fight, and they have beaten them over and over and over again. Like, if you can have a 10-to-1 advantage in a confined area with unlimited air support, by the way, and unlimited ability to pound your opponent with high explosive ordnance from an unreachable point in the sky, and you can still lose, then your army is rotten. And your army is rotten because your society is rotten. And that is what Israel is. And again, the Palestinians, they understood their enemy when they were going into this, and they have triumphed over it so far. Now, of course, Netanyahu will say, I will never give up, I will never stop, we will continue no matter what it takes. But he's lost. And the fact that Biden's had to come out and say, don't continue the war, well, now the challenge is, of course, if the Israeli regime continues on this route, and there's no guarantee if they continue down this route that they're not going to face some kind of internal rebellion. Uh, it was it was a it's a testament to the fact that the Israeli society, although it is unified in its willingness to carry out mass slaughter, has reached a point in terms of the military being stymied in Gaza that the unity of Israeli society is cracking up. So this is a moment for recognition of the fact that the revolutionary forces in Palestine, and of course we should never forget the role that the Hezbollah plays and the role that the Yemenis play. They have beaten the empire so far. The empire, the US imperialists, are a slippery band of customers. So don't be surprised if they try and come back somehow. But it's unprecedented, basically, for the US president to come out and say to the Israelis, not in so many words, but basically say, you can't win. So it's remarkable. Now, is Biden, as Jerry asks in the comments, is Biden going to do anything? Is he going to actually do anything to stop the Israelis? Is he going to stop the arms shipments? Well, this is an interesting question. It's clear that from Biden's speech, and Biden didn't write this, of course he didn't, somebody else did. And the US military will know this very well, that the Israelis can't win. And the longer it goes on, the worse the position will get, not just for the Zionists themselves, but for the US imperialists and their remaining comprador regimes. The longer this slaughter goes on, the worse the pressure will get on the comprador king in Jordan, the worse the pressure will get on the comprador regime in Egypt, and the relationship between the Saudi regime and the US will get worse, because the Saudi regime will be under pressure even from their population. So the situation for the US was becoming a no-win situation. The longer it went on, the worse their position got. The worse Israel's position got. The calculation has clearly been made in the centers of power in Washington that better to end this now and then try and stabilize Israel. Remember that all the way back in, I think it was about October the 8th or 9th, Thomas Friedman, the spokesman for liberal Zionism in the United States, one of the chief spokesmen, basically said that this problem is about Hamas, but it's mostly, in Israeli terms, it's about Netanyahu and the extremists. And we need to get rid of Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich. This is the liberal Zionist delusion that they can get rid of these people. But of course, they can't get rid of these people because the political forces in Israel that are strengthening and have been strengthening over the last few years are, of course, the most vicious, reactionary, ultranationalist, fascist forces, personified by the lunatic Ben-Gvir and that homicidal accountant Smotrich. So the idea that Thomas Friedman, and this will be one that is shared by key members of the Biden administration, that somehow they can shove the ultranationalists to one side, is deluded. But this always happens before the end of a settler colonial regime, before the end of the white regime in apartheid South Africa. There was a surge in support for it was called the Conservative Party at the time, but it was basically an ultra reactionary, pure fascist organization. They were the ones that were really gaining support because it was seen that the Afrikaner National Party couldn't manage it anymore, that they were losing control of the situation, that they had lost the war in Namibia. They had been beaten by the Cubans in Namibia, and this is what is happening now. The Israelis are losing. They can't wage the war that the Smotriches and the Ben-Gvirs would want them to wage, because if they tried to wage a war on Hezbollah, they would lose. It's like they've lost in Gaza, and now they are fatally weakened. And again, the US military will be telling the civilians that the longer it goes on, the worse it will get. There may be mutinies in splits inside the Israeli army. I mean, there are claims coming from inside Israel that, again, these can't be verified, though, that there is no longer much of an effective command structure inside key elements of the Israeli army. The Israeli economy, as Biden himself admitted, is tanking and will continue to tank. The longer this goes on as well, the more Israel will fall into like an international boycott. The other factor here, of course, is that if the US wishes to retain its position in West Asia, it still wants to be seen, US imperialists still want to be seen as the power you have to go to get an agreement, to be able to do any kind of diplomatic solutions. That's why Biden talked about we will reach an agreement that secures Israel's northern border. One of the other pieces of pressure that has been coming onto the US in recent weeks has been the fact that first the Russians and then the Chinese have been making diplomatic moves, which even some of the comprador regimes like the Bahrainis have, at least in words, gone along with. So the King of Bahrain went to Moscow, I think it was recently, and sat down with Putin and welcomed Putin as a partner for resolving the crisis in the Middle East. You got the same thing with various representatives of some of the worst, most reactionary Arab regimes going to Beijing and essentially asking the Chinese to come in and help resolve the situation. Because the compradors, and including the Saudi regime, some of these people might be wretched, and indeed they are, and completely enemies of their own people, which indeed they are, but some of them aren't completely stupid. They're not stupid enough to think that they can carry on backing a losing horse here. So they've decided to, as Mohammed bin Salman has been doing, spread their bets, try and get something going with the Chinese to essentially end this situation, because the longer it goes on, even the Gulf autocrats will be feeling the pressure from their own populations. It will start to create splits all up to the very top of these regimes as they come under more and more pressure. And so they're desperate to find a way out of this problem that is confronting them, not for humanitarian reasons or reasons of Arab or Islamic Brotherhood, but simply for self-preservation. The longer it goes on and the more that they are seen to be allied to the US and the Israeli regime, then the more they are in trouble. So you've got the Russians and the Chinese starting to make progress in terms of their political power in West Asia, which the US very much does not want. So that's also a factor in pressure upon the Biden regime to bring this to a close and being seen to be the ones who have brought it to a close. So this is another factor in the pressure that's on the Biden regime. That is one of the reasons why Biden's made this speech today. What comes afterwards is going to be interesting. Does Netanyahu just, in desperation to preserve his own position, just say, fuck off, I'm continuing? In that case, what happens? Well, what happens is the situation for the US in the region gets even worse. So let's pause now for comments in the chat. Hello to David Greenwood, who's over in West Yorkshire. Good evening to you. AJ Williamson says, I've just been watching the Reform Party election rally from Boston and Skegness. Kill me now. Why on earth would you do that to yourself? I mean, I'm going to be doing a special on this next week, and I'm dreading it. The amount of crap I've got to watch and read for that one. But let us know the highlights, if there were any. Did Richard Tice down a pint? Did Nigel Farage come on stage, do 3 shots of vodka and sing a racist song? I don't know what the highlights will be. CJ, greetings to you in Petersburg, Virginia. Jawad, good evening to you, comrade. Lee, good evening to you. Yebx says, I'm just stopping by to wish all of you well. Unfortunately, I have to leave to run errands. Well, thanks for stopping by. Arnold, greetings to you. Good evening to Chris Casseroles in North London. Davey joins us from Gwynedd. Carmo, good evening to you. DE, hello. Almir joins us and says, hello, comrades from Slovenia, from a small town where Tito used to live. Good to have you with us. Jerry, good evening. Claude joins us from the Socialist Republic of Denton, just up the road from me. Good to have you with us. Jerry says, I've also been watching the Reform Party rally, even more of a pantomime than the rest of the show. My God. Yepek says, did you know that the Biden family once made a financial deal with a religious cult, the Moonies? Wouldn't surprise me. Look, Biden's whole family is so corrupt, like they would literally do a deal with the devil himself if he turned up and offered reasonable terms. Well, I'll have to read up on that one. Svetlana, comradely greetings to you in Moscow. Peter, good evening to you, a dweller in perfidious Albion. Comrade Beer is with us. Richard Madden says, the Workers' Party have announced they are standing in my seat in the upcoming election. Should I vote for them or just not bother? Tusk standing too. Well, oh, great. So whoever his job it is to try and coordinate left challenges has clearly not done it again. So you've got a Tusk candidate and a Workers' Party candidate standing. Well, Richard, my advice would be find out who the Workers' Party candidate is. They're usually on social media. Find out where they stand on the key issues. So the Tusk candidate too, find out where they stand. So if it's Workers' Party, the bare minimum will be that they've got a decent position on Gaza. So look at that. Again, look at their social media, email them or send them or tweet at them, or if their DMs are open, send them a message saying, well, I'd like to know where you stand on the following issues, not just where the party stands, where you stand as a candidate. And direct the same email or correspondence to Tusk as well. Find out where that candidate stands. Talk to them if you possibly can, if you want to. And then once you've interrogated their positions, vote for the candidate who has the better positions and who actually seems the more convincing. But again, like this, I'd say that it's an inability to come up with a coordinated left challenge, but I don't think it's an inability anymore. I think that the fact that Tusk still stand against like other left candidates in elections just is not so much an accident, it's more deliberate policy. More on that next week, by the way. We have more things to come. Good evening to Jason. How you doing, comrade? President Jesus joins us, as does Abtin. Littlestone is with us. Comrade Terry Eaton, good to have you here. Jerry says, I've heard that mention that there was a mutiny brewing in the Israeli armed forces. I've heard things like that too, but we'll see. Mr. Piece of Work joins us and says, Viva la Revolucion. Indeed. Abtin asks, where do you think we'll be in a year? And in what direction is this going, in your opinion? Interesting question, Abtin. I'll give you a brief answer. In a year's time, massive crisis inside the Israeli regime. Whether they accept this deal or not, it will be a massive crisis. It'll be a massive crisis if Netanyahu tries to cling on to power and continue the war. It'll be a massive crisis if they accept this deal and end the war. The only direction this goes in now is of further crisis in Israel. Whether this deal ever comes to fruition or whether Biden's promises of 608 trucks a day to Gaza comes to fruition, I don't know. But this war has fatally damaged the US imperialists in the region. I think that one thing I will say is I think that there will be Ansar Allah will end up in full control within the next year or so of Yemen. I think that they are now correctly seen as the force that beat the British and the Americans, which they did. They have done. And that will give them an enormous amount of prestige, and it'll mean that the Saudis don't fancy fighting them again. So I'll say Ansar Allah to unify Yemen, I think, within the next year or so. Other predictions, I mean, I don't want to make too many before doing some research. I've a suspicion that the Egyptian regime might be in trouble. Might be some trouble brewing for them. The future of the Jordanian comprador regime is going to be interesting. watch out for that. That might be preservation of the comprador regimes might be one of the reasons why the US is looking to get out of this. So we'll have to see. But I think that it looks very bad for the Israeli regime now. Even if Trump wins and says, we're going to give Bibi anything you need, anything at all. For a start, there's always a huge gap between what Trump says and what Trump does. And also the crisis in Israeli society is only going to get worse now. So deep crisis in Israel, getting towards being existential. And the unification of Yemen under the legitimate government of Ansar Allah, probably the unity of the various Palestinian factions as part of the dialogue with the Russians and the Chinese, probably maybe the exit of Abbas from the Palestinian Authority presidency under the pressure of the masses of the West Bank. Things are moving, admittedly haltingly, in a positive direction. And that can be hard to see when you're watching horror and the horrors committed by US imperialism coming across your screens every day. But the things have got to this point is a victory for the resistance forces. Almir says, it is also a potential disaster for the Arab regimes. Arab people are angry and feel shame. All it takes is a spark and the governments can start falling. As I said, that's a big concern for the US imperialists. Good evening to Jenny, who joins us, and good evening to Yu Wan, who joins us from Phoenix, Arizona. President Jesus says, we haven't had a cool war name since Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Yeah, the branding was much better back then. Now, again, it just sounds like bad Steven Seagal movies. Not even the Steven Seagal movies where he actually moved around. These are the ones which he shoots in Hungary and just sits in a chair. Isidore, good evening to you. Svetlana said good evening to you. Comrade Ian Foster is with us. Hello to you. Potted Rodent is with us. David Garcia says, please revisit your critique of the PSL. The origins are one thing, but there are no signs of Trotskyism anywhere from what I've seen. We are the most present leftist force in my hometown. Well, I disagree. The Trotskyism is all over the PSL program, but I will take your comment in the spirit which it's intended. And what I will do, David, is I will go away and reread some of the key documents from the PSL. Will take a couple of weeks before I can do this. And I will come back with a more developed critique of the program and practices of the PSL within a couple of weeks or so. So if I haven't done it by 2 weeks from today, David, feel free to come back and remind me again, because you asked me to revisit the critique, and I think if you're a member of it and you say it's a serious organization and you've made your request here known, I'll go and revisit it and I'll give you a more comprehensive critique than the one I gave the other night. So I will come back to this, and if I don't come back to it, be sure to remind me. Yes, I deleted a Zionist troll who was very unimaginative. Abtin says, yesterday I had a new experience. One of the people dining with us started an argument with me because I don't support the MEK in Israel. Suddenly found three comrades defending me and President Raisi. It's very odd that you find an MEK fan. I've run into Iranian monarchists in the north of England. They were an odd bunch. I've run into understandably angry, exiled Iranian Marxists. I could at least understand their point of view. But I've never run into any MEK people. That's a new one on me. Israel people, yes. They're usually the same people who support the fascist groups in Britain. But that's an interesting experience. Interesting also that you found three people who took your side. That's a positive experience there. Greetings from Stella GC, who says, solidarity from the Chicago Workers' School. Nom de Guerre says, greetings from the Chicago Workers' School. Good to have you with us. Munis joins us. Dennis Curry says, good afternoon. JJ says, the Bronx in the house. Indeed. Michael says, Sersha Don Palestine. So I'm going to say that is Irish for victory to the Palestinians, I'm going to guess. Hands Off Palestine on Twitter says, people seem to think it was foolish on behalf of the resistance to set off this giant ambush against the Zionists, that the cost in human lives was huge and not worth it. The same argument was made against the FLN when they started fighting the French. The same argument would have been made against the Kenyans who fought the British, against the Vietnamese who fought the French and then the Americans, against the Vietnamese again who fought the South Vietnamese regime and who fought the Americans again. The same argument is always made because the response of the imperialists is always horrible. It's always horrific. It's always a gargantuan act of slaughter takes place. And for many people, often not the people involved, it has to be said, but for a lot of exiles and liberal types who will say it's not worth it, you should have negotiated. Well, there was no negotiation on offer. Not for the Palestinians, not for the Algerians, not for the Vietnamese, not for the Koreans, not for any of these people, these nations, these oppressed peoples. The war, even with its horrific costs, was the only avenue they had open to them. And a war which is supported by the masses, as this war has been, is a war that that can be won, as all of these peoples have shown. So yes, it's an argument that is always made, and it's an argument that is always wrong because it starts off on a false premise, that the idea being that there is another way to go. There is the Israelis and their US patrons had sealed off all the other ways. Hands Off Palestine says, people don't seem to grasp the unity between the fighters and the people, and that the overwhelming majority were willing to pay this price. Yeah, this is overwhelmingly true. People who make that criticism still seem to think that there's some sort of gap between the fighters, the National Liberation Forces, and the masses. If there was any gap between the National Liberation Forces and the masses, then this operation wouldn't have been possible. Then they would have lost. It's only with the support of the masses that this can happen. If you don't have that, then you can't beat a force like Israel and the US. If you don't have that absolute unity behind you, you can't win. And this is what the Israelis have found. Martin says, I am not Palestinian or Arab or Muslim. I have no connection to the region personally or otherwise, yet I'm feeling so much pride right now. Is that strange? Grassy Knoll answers that one, says, no, you are on the side of the oppressed. And Abtin makes the correct point. This is humanity winning and advancing. Proud not to be part of the Anglo-Saxon rules-based order. Hello to, says GL. Klavek joins us. He says, greetings, hello comrades from Robert in working class Detroit. Dennis says, when people say the Yanks haven't won anything, they divided Iraq and Syria, eliminated Libya and created failed nation states. That's not winning. Look, they've destroyed a lot of places. Yeah, that's true. They destroyed the government of Libya. That's true. But then essentially couldn't secure their gains there. They failed to win in Syria. They were beaten there. They were driven out of Iraq. They wanted to turn Iraq into a stable puppet state. Remember, the original plan for Iraq and the whole of West Asia was to have stable puppet regimes that were overseen by a minimal American occupation that would secure the American presence in the region for another 100 years. That's why they call it a project for a new American century, thus underpinning the American global system. That's failed. All their plans are in ruins. Yes, they've killed a lot of people, and they've created a lot of horror, but that's still not winning. They haven't won. They haven't achieved their own objectives. When they've faced a unified opposition, they've always lost. They failed to conquer the big prize, which is Iran, and they couldn't win in Syria, and now their plans in Eastern Europe have blown up in their face. So you're right in that they've created a lot of death and destruction, but their plans for domination have all failed. It's all blown up. As soon as they were faced with determined resistance, they scuttled out of there. They lost and were humiliated in Afghanistan. So their actual armed forces haven't won anything since, Grenada? if we're going to count that as a win. Trump says he wants Elon Musk as a political advisor. Trump says a lot of things. He'll say something else tomorrow. We're going to it'd be interesting to see how Trump responds to the his conviction. Barry McKenzie joins us from the land down under. I'm assuming that means you're from the Australasian part of the world. AJ Williamson says, the Workers' Party and Tusk are standing in my constituency, Aberdeen North, too. Look, this has reached ridiculous points now. I mean, this also happened 20 odd years ago in the election in 2001 with the Socialist Labour Party and the Socialist Alliance standing against each other. And the SLP were a more established group, and yet the Socialist Alliance, which was the Trotskyite-run group, ended up standing in all these seats and splitting the vote anyway. So it's not just that there can't be agreements reached. I think now that with a lot of these organizations, they're specifically there to cause chaos and split votes and not enable any kind of unified stance. That's not to say that the Workers' Party are standing on a much better platform, but the fact that no coordination can be had at all between them just says to me that some of these characters are just in it to sabotage things. And again, like if you're in Aberdeen North, interrogate the platforms that both candidates are standing on, try and have some communication with both of them, find out where they stand on the big issue, on the key issues, Gaza being one, the Ukraine war being another, the attempted war on China being another, and all the domestic issues as well. So interrogate them and find out which one is the best and the most convincing. And I would advise voting for the one that seems the most convincing. Gleb says, do you remember how Galloway humiliated Christopher Hitchens, I think on the Bill Maher or the Jon Stewart show? Yeah, I mean, it's not hard. I mean, Christopher Hitchens massively overrated. I mean, yeah, he was like, he could do witty sort of drawing room banter, but Galloway's a very good agitator, always has been. For whatever criticisms I have of him, and there are plenty to be had, he's a very effective debater. Hitchens was just a smug arsehole, who was, by the way, nowhere near as smart as people thought he was. He's a dumb person's idea of what a smart person is. Lome Bart joins us from Spain. Daltonio Smitavelli says, greetings from the red state of Georgia. HHHEEE says, NorCal in the house. I'm taking it that means Northern California. Eduardo says, in North Ealing, we have a WPGB candidate who is a Palestinian. Today, they come up with one in Southall, too. Well, again, WPB will have some decent candidates standing. And if they have a decent candidate standing in their area, then they should be voted for. Let's see who else is here. Tim Gray, good evening to you. Nomdi Gare says, Ansar Allah claims to have targeted and hit the aircraft carrier USS Eisenhower. The US administration says they don't know anything about it. So they did hit it then. S.W. Haster says, hello from Seoul. Do you think Israel will continue to exist? Do you think the US, Britain, Germany, and Collective West will pay a price for being direct participants in this genocide? Israel won't continue to exist. I don't think it's got that much longer left, to be honest. Will the British and Germans and the US pay the price? They're already paying the price. They were already paying the price of their imperialism by continually being exposed as the neo-colonial states that they are, and the resistance to them will continue all over the world. Everywhere where they've previously been dominant, they will now be resisted to an ever greater degree. So they will pay a price. It might not be sudden and dramatic, but their position as imperialist powers will be fatally undermined by what they have done here. It was already being undermined, but that process of collapse will now be amplified. Abtin says, a Syrian MEK fan as well, anti-Assad. The weirdest thing is he's coming to my dental office for treatment after all this. Just, Not suggesting anything, but just watch Marathon Man with Laurence Olivier. That's all I'll say about that. Klavic says, I haven't run into any Americans who know who Jake Sullivan is. I don't think he's known outside of TV studios. Most working class Americans will have no idea who the fuck the weirdo is. If there is a ceasefire, it means Israel has lost. How long till it collapses? Not sure. The US will desperately try to shore it up. But there are a lot of internal contradictions there that can't be papered over. So I don't think it's got long, to be honest. I mean, at the risk of making myself a hostage to fortune, I'll say Israel, in its current form, gone in 5 years. Very bold prediction there, and if I'm still doing this or I'm still online in 5 years' time, you can come back to me and say I was wrong. But I think that it's not got long after this. This deal that Biden was presenting, part of it is about desperately trying to shore Israel up. Whether Israel is capable of accepting that deal is another question, or whether the US will force the issue. Rob, hello to you, and hello to Beans on the wrong side of the Pennines. Good to have you with us. No anesthesia for compradors, comrades. Is it safe, as Laurence Olivier once said. Solidarity to Hands Off Palestine, who is joining us from Tunisia. Stephen Burrows says the American system is dying in Ukraine and now Palestine. American imperialism is being beaten in Ukraine and Palestine and will not win in Taiwan either. It's fairly obvious that if the Palestinians are expelled from Palestine, they never get to go back, hence why they're not leaving. Matthew joins us from Massachusetts. Eric is with us from Western North Carolina. Otis is with us from the Democratic People's Republic of Newcastle upon Tyne. The US had Clint Eastwood in Grenada. Very true. Heartbreak Ridge. One of Clint's most hilarious films. Because because he was basically trying to portray the invasion of Grenada as some heroic triumph, which it's very much not, of course. Some disagreement, says Hands Off Palestine, arose between you and Michael Christopher about a certain point about gender theory. Could you elaborate? Yes, I'll elaborate. He's completely wrong. The more I find out about his politics, the fact that he's a member of the CPUSA makes me doubt a lot of other things about him as well. CPUSA is a completely rotten organization. And if he's into gender theory, then to be quite blunt about it, that means you're not a materialist. You're an idealist. So I have no time for people who persist in peddling that illusion. If he's peddling that illusion, then he's welcome to it, but he should really rechristen himself as an idealist. Mr. Chopin says, greetings from the state of John Brown, Kansas. It's easy to seem smart arguing against religion. Well, some people manage to be dumb about it. Remember, Kyle Kalinski's channel, it was called Secular Talk for a while, and he sure looked pretty stupid. Chase Filling Games says, greetings from Texas. Israel's current genocide is a last-ditch effort to protect its own existence because it knows it can't maintain an apartheid system forever. This is true. Chanish says, Trotskyists are building the international, at least they claim to do so. British and Canadians were revolutionary in the name of the party, Marxist tendency, I guess they called. Yeah, they're building a fake international. Look, they are. This is the RCP, the rechristened International Marxist Tendency. They've clearly been reorganized by forces who will remain nameless to essentially be a spoiler operation. I will be going into their program and critiquing that in a program to be released soon. But they're a spoiler operation, the same way Trotskyites always are. They're either a useful tool of the state and the ruling class, or an inadvertent useful tool of the state and the ruling class. Rob says, I hope you're right with your bold prediction. I hope I am too. I hate looking foolish. Right. Hello to Zuleika, who's joined us. Stephen Burrows says, gender theory as a distraction from the issues of class and power relations has been remarkably successful. Yeah, it's an invention of bourgeois academics. And its whole purpose is to promote idealism and reactionary thought. And also, let's be quite frank, it's an attack on women's rights, and it's fundamentally an attack on gay rights as well. So it's a completely reactionary theory, and any so-called communist who has anything to do with it is a weakling, a coward, or a feeble-minded fool. And at this stage, I have absolutely no time for anybody who goes along with it. Look, the Marxist critiques are all out there. My own party has published several very good critiques of it. People who insist upon sticking to this, well, frankly, I've no time for them. And they've made it when I published that list of points on Twitter, I got some pushback about Iran. I got some pushback about Syria. But the big thing that set off all the Western leftists was when I said that gender ideology was bollocks. And it was an invention of propagandistic academics. And it's caused genuine harm to vulnerable individuals. So like that whole Tavistock clinic thing, I mean, I haven't finished reading the bloody Cash review yet. I will get to finishing that off. But it's caused vulnerable people to go through surgical butchery, excused by the left. So if you're all right with that, then find yourself something else to call yourself, because you're not a fucking Marxist. You're not a communist. You're a fool. Nothing more than a fool. And if you think you're being nice by indulging people's delusions and by indulging the theories of postmodernism, you're not. You're being an idiot. Stop it. The time has come to move on from this. And the time has come also to be as blunt as I'm being right now. I'm going to be absolutely blunt with you. If you believe in this, you're not a Marxist. You want to go and call yourself a liberal, an idealist, an anarchist, a post-structuralist, a Foucauldian, whatever the fuck you want to label yourself, fine. Stop fucking claiming to be a Marxist. You're not communists. You're a bunch of frauds. You side with the bourgeoisie. You promote idealism. You promote reactionary beliefs. You do it whilst hiding behind this stupid label of being kind. You're not kind. You're not decent people. You're a horrific bunch of reactionaries, and you should go fuck off. Stop disgracing the word communist with your existence and go and just be an anarchist along with the ghost of Murray Bookchin and that guy Alexander Reed Ross. Fuck off and join them. You're not welcome to watch this. If you turn up in the chat, I will fucking ban you. You should be shown the door from any Marxist organization you turn up in until you do some fucking reading. Because if you do any reading of the Marxist tradition, you'll realize what this is. So that's the last word I'll say on the subject. Yeah, you are a reactionary idealist, and the door is there for you. Again, you come up here pushing that shit, I'm just going to kick you out. There's no excuse for it. So there we go. That's where I stand on the issue. Any problems with it, you can mail me at idon'tgiveashit@gmail.com. So the show now, I'm going to draw this to a close because I have to be up ruinously early in the morning to head over to very much the wrong end of the Mersey to join the Liverpool comrades leafleting out in the market tomorrow. So I will be on the road tomorrow. So there'll be no show then. I'll be back doing the Patreon Q&A at 4 p.m. on Sunday. Some very good questions have come in. So until then, I'll say thank you to everybody who's tuned in. And I'll be back with you again on Sunday.